week. We are winding down. We've had a few weeks of extraordinary events throughout the country. There's a few more events coming up. Tomorrow evening, we have the launch of the Palestine Solidarity Organization at NMU, Nelson Mandela University. And the day after, we have art as a form of resistance by our comrades in Block the Boat Durban, UKZN. Perhaps those involved in the organization of those events can, in the chat space, could give us a few more details. That will be appreciated. So my name is Salim Valley. I'm from the South African BDS Coalition, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the South African Academic Network Against Apartheid Israel, and I'll stop there. And we thank you for coming. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers, people doing incredibly important work around worker struggles and internationalism. I'll very briefly introduce them. There's a lot to say about each one of them, but we have Lara Kiswani, who's from Block the Boat Oakland, but also the executive director of AROC, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. And they work with and serve many poor and working class communities and organizations, and mobilize against racism, militarism, and forced migration. Lara's family is from Beit Iksa, I think, in Palestine, occupied Palestine, but she was born and grew up in San Francisco. I think a lot of us know about the wonderful work they've been doing in blocking Zim lines, the Israeli shipping company. I think they chased them all over North America and mobilized many communities, including indigenous communities, but she can tell us much more about that. Manal Shakir is from the Palestine New Unions. She also belongs to the Land Defense Committee and Stop the Wall. And Comrade Mzikazi Nkata is from the National Union of Public Sector and Allied Workers Union and the Secretary of SAFTU in the Kabeja region. And has always been working with the Palestinian Solidarity Organizations and other groups. John Apollos and Mamatwe Sibey are the General Secretary and President of Giwusa, respectively. And Giwusa is, of course, one of the key unions involved with the Clover Strikers. We have limited time and there's much more to say about the importance of these struggles, and for us, particularly Clover, and the Clover Strikers have very, very bravely resisted the austerity measures, the cuts in their salary, the viciousness of MOCO, which has taken over Clover, and John and Mabwete will tell us more about that. This is, we into the 5th month of the strike. While the workers are extremely courageous, they need support from all of us. So welcome everybody from whichever part of the world you're from. And we will start with John and Comrade John Apollos and Mawetwe Sibey. So the floor is over to you. We're giving people about 10 minutes each. And and then we'll have question time discussions. Please feel free to use the chat facility to ask your questions or to make any comments you want. We will start then with John or Sibe. Please go ahead.
Hi, Salim, can you hear me?
Very clearly, John.
Aluta.
Continua.
Thank you, Comrade Salim. Yeah, I'll be speaking on the matter of the Clover Strike. As you mentioned, the strike is now in its 5th month. It started on the 22nd of November last year. Although at this point in time, the strike is losing some of its momentum, which is quite understandable, taking into account the duration of the struggle. But the ones who are still out are quite determined to continue with the strike and not to surrender or retreat on the basis of the company's terms. But I think just to start off, I think what is quite important is that, which has assisted us in the sustaining and building up the resilience and the resistance of our members, has been the solidarity support that was organized and expressed by the Palestinian Solidarity Movement here in South Africa, as well as internationally. In particular, the support from the new Palestinian unions in Palestine. And I think for us, that kind of direct support and interaction between our members here in South Africa and the comrades in Palestine was quite an important development, because it assisted us in clarifying to our members the importance of the struggle of the Palestinian masses and the struggle of workers here in South Africa. In fact, because of the situation where Clover is now owned by an Israeli-based company, which is the Central Bottling Company, that kind of linkages has become quite explicit, and therefore the solidarity support and the fact that in one of our mass meetings there was a direct link up with the comrades in Palestine. I think that kind of assisted us in exposing and clarifying to our members the nature of the enemy that we are dealing with, because our members got a much better insight into the nature of the Central Bottling Company, its practices, its exploitative measures and activities in Palestine, in the occupied territories, as well as its record in supporting the Zionist project in Palestine. So I think for us, that kind of political and practical engagement with the comrades in Palestine, I think was an important development for us. I think the second important area that we like to sort of emphasize is the support of the South African-based Palestinian solidarity movements. Here again, their active political support, their active practical support for workers, I think have also kind of further cemented the linkages and the understanding of our members in relation to Palestine. Now, the reason why we are emphasizing these two important aspects of the solidarity support and interaction is that we can only appreciate and understand the significance of this kind of solidarity and support if we really unpack the context in which the Clover Strike is taking place. Today, in our country, we find that there is a massive slide in the political consciousness of the working class in general. We have seen the rise of black right-wing movements in the form of Operation Dudula. That is openly and clearly mobilizing on the basis of xenophobic perspectives and activities where they make the migrants the cause of poverty and unemployment. And clearly this shows us that the process of depoliticization and demobilization of the South African masses have kind of further entrenched itself in our country. It is clearly a result of 28 years of new liberal policies on the part of the ANC government and its own active processes of depoliticization of the South African masses, but also it's also a reflection of our inability as a progressive labor movement and left movements in general to develop an alternative perspective, an alternative mass movement in our country. So the Clover Strike and the solidarity support from sections of the Palestinian movements and even from internationally, clearly for us takes on a important significance, because it shows that through these kinds of cooperation, but through these kinds of interaction, we can lay the basis for the building of a new movement in our country, and not only in our country, but the fact that we have seen also internationally that right-wing nationalist movements are also on the rise. They are clearly taking advantage of the levels of insecurity, unemployment, and poverty that are being deepened through the attacks of the ruling class. But as I also said, in terms of the inability of progressive movements to occupy the space and present an alternative perspective on the causes of the poverty and unemployment. Now, I think what's important for us is that clearly, as we are stating, the strike is still ongoing at the moment. It's in its fifth month. Our members at this point in time still have not given us the mandate to execute any kind of retreat. They are still quite resolute to continue the fight, because what they are fighting for is not only the protection of their own existing jobs and salaries, but also that of the future generation that could come into companies like Clover. So I think for us, the support that has been generated in a form of the consumer boycott, in a form of solidarity support, practical support in terms of providing monetary support in the form of food parcels to members. For us, those are still quite important. But more than that, what we are also saying is that Palestinian movements like the BDS and others do have an opportunity now to also build on the kind of linkages that have been established between the BDS, the Palestinian solidarity movements, and trade unions around concrete struggles that incorporates both the South African dimension as well as the Palestinian dimension in our movements, because that link between our struggles and the struggles of the Palestinian masses has been broken because of this process of the depoliticization of the masses in our country. Because if you take the situation in the 1980s, when the mass movement was on the rise, when it was radical and revolutionary in its perspectives, the link and the support for the Palestinian struggles was a natural extension of the fight against apartheid capitalism here in South Africa. We could see that process reflected in some of the symbolism, some of the names of resistance in the Middle East being taken on board here in our country. Activists gave themselves nicknames that reflected the struggles of the Palestinian people as well as the other areas in the Middle East. Even some of our settlements were named after some of the symbols and the people and the places in the Middle East. All of that has been kind of dismantled. So here, I mean, for us, the significance of this solidarity between us and the Palestinian movements lays the basis for us to build on extending that kind of struggles and connections beyond the Clover. I mean, the BDS has identified many other companies of Israel and products that are operating within the borders of South Africa. So an orientation to workers in those factories, in those corporations that are Israeli-based, that are linked to the Zionists, should be actually a task that both the BDS and the labor movement should actually explore, so that the connections, the linkages are not only established when there are strikes, but it becomes a normal course of our struggles, the normal course of our movements. So I think we do have an important opportunity to once again root the Palestinian liberation struggle within the consciousness and within the movements and struggles of workers here in South Africa. And for us, that is the important significance of this form of solidarity that has been displayed and organized since the 22nd of November. Thank you, Comrade Salim. I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Comrade John. Sibey, would you like to add?
Comrade Salim, I think Comrade John has said mouthful, save to emphasize what we are concerned is concerning the wage, disputes and all of that. We do think that the Clover struggle has been a tremendous success from the point of view of raising the issue of solidarity with the people of Palestine. And I do think what the struggle has demonstrated is that the working class in this country is capable of taking issues which until now, many people would have thought are the issues that belong to the margins of the left. And if you like, in the case of Palestine, you could even say that, in the margins of the Muslim communities. And I think what this struggle has done is that it has put the issue on the agenda firmly of an organized working class movement. It has become an issue discussed, in Black working class communities in a way that I think it has not really happened before and in a long time. And I do think that this, for me, is also a lesson for other struggles that we wage on issues that so far the working class is not, or we have not been able to make the working class to be able to move on. And I mean, there are many issues on climate justice, on gender justice, And the way that I think the comrades of the Palestinian Solidarity movement, intervened in the struggle itself was quite exemplary. And I've said this to you, Comrade Salim, and I think it's worth highlighting to all comrades that, where we've seen other movements content with just a statement from the union, content with solidarity messages from your, general secretaries and the presidents of the union, the tops, what the comrades also the Palestinian Solidarity movement have done was quite incredible, actually. I mean, joining on the day-to-day picket, in daily pickets, in demonstrations, and really being part of the struggle in quite an active and meaningful way. That also, raised the profile of the struggle, but also raised the consciousness over what is happening there. It is those day-to-day discussions about the pride of the people of Palestine, about the evictions of the people from their home, the brutality of colonialism that I think the workers at Clover, but also many working class people in this country, Black working class people in particular, could relate to, because it speaks to their own memory of apartheid, which in many ways continue in the legacy of segregation that continue to define the conditions of the Black working class in this country and so on. And I do think that marks for me an important stage in retying the knot of history, which Comrade John spoke to, about how the issue of Palestine was in the past very central to our consciousness, at the heart of the struggle, but also how we can be able to bring it back on the basis of genuine and consistent working class solidarity, instead of relying on support from the elite, the ANC elite that clearly has betrayed the struggle, not only of the Black working class in this country, but actually of the masses of Palestine, driven by the same logic of capitulation to cooperate interests that, of course, is imperialist and responsible for perpetuation of a condition, or rather the oppression of the Black working class majority here, but also the oppression of the people of Palestine. So on that note, comrades, we are saying also thank you for that support, but also support of many comrades who mobilized. And I'm not going to be able to list all of you. The latest support that we've received is from comrades from Manchester, trade union comrades involved in Palestinian Solidarity movement, over above many community activists in this country, many comrades within the Palestinian Solidarity movement who have mobilized food parcel, who have mobilized donation to the union, that unfortunately remain in a very dire state, because if there's anything that we refuse to do was to take the union situation as a basis for approach to the Clover struggle, and that situation unfortunately remains, and it remains quite dire, and that's the reason that we continue to appeal for that solidarity and more of it in the coming days and weeks from this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Comrade Sibay. This is an absolutely critical struggle, and workers have shown immense determination. A number of workers have been injured, have been assaulted very gravely. There have been some deaths, but they've shown what Palestinians know really well, which is sumud. I think that the struggle continues. We really need to do as much as we can to support the workers. I think funding and resources is absolutely vital. Many of those workers are suffering greatly, so that is really essential. There are many aspects of the strike which we need to talk about. Comrade John talked about the weakness of the labor movement, but it has inspired many workers, despite the bureaucracy of some of these unions. It's also exposed this lie that through investment from foreign companies, we will get economic growth and then employment in a trickle-down way. And we've seen that this, over the past almost 3 decades, does not work. There are other aspects. There are people from grain who are part of this discussion. They'll tell us the strategy, hopefully, of Israeli agribusiness and high tech and what it does to small farmers, dairy farmers, and others throughout our continent and even beyond in places like India. They have a track record, actually. But we'll come back to all of those questions and many more. So thank you so much, Comrade John and Comrade Sibey. We're now going to turn to Comrade Mzi. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Comrade. I'll just switch on my video to greet everyone. This is Mzikazi Ngata, SAFTU Secretary in Gqeberha Local, who's also a member of NUPSO, National Union of Allied Workers, who's a Deputy Secretary. I will close my video and then continue. Thanks, comrades. So I will just draw mine, starting from in 2018, where SAFTU as a federation took it to the streets, where we were rejecting the minimum wage bill and also the labor relations amendment bill. So that's what I will touch on in relation to our topic today of our worker struggles. As we all know that we've been fighting as workers, rejecting exactly this minimum wage of 20 rands, which is not helping us, and also which is not exactly the 20 rands that the government is talking about, because if you look at other categories of work, it's 15 rand, and then in others is 11 rand, depending on the type of work that you are doing, and also how precarity is that work. So we have seen so many employers, especially in the industrial sector, who have used that bill because they saw it working for them, because it was easy for them to even lower the rates that they were already paying their employees. Because now there's a bill that has been given, it's in policy written in black and white. So it's easy now for them to say, yeah, even our government is agreeing that you deserve less than what we are giving you. So we've been struggling with those type of issues in many workplaces where we have to go and fight for workers, because it is really not easy to find yourself earning this salary and then the next day your salary is being lowered simply because there's a bill that has been amended, which is saying people can just earn 20 rands and below. Also, again, comrades, the issue of the labor relations amendment bill, which was also forcing workers to go for a balloting. Now you can imagine with all the struggles that we have in our workplaces. So now, for example, for workers who are coming from a particular workplace, now for them to have any provincial or a national strike, they will first have to ballot, which is something that can never be sustainable, even by our trade unions, because they won't afford to do all of this. And also at the same time, it is taking away the voice and the power of employees within the workplaces. It's taking away our voice to bargain, to sit in the table and negotiate with the employer when we want our increments. So we have seen it didn't only end there in 2018, it is still manifesting itself. As we all know, that even today, we are sitting with a crisis where our public sector wage bill has been frozen, and we've been sitting without any increment, also with no voice to go and strike, because many labor movements have signed and agreed to this killing of employees, to this deepening hunger to employees. And also not looking I'm not sure, I don't even want to say I'm not looking, but I don't know how did they even arrive into agreeing to this policy, because it is also killing the few that is remaining in the workplace, because they now have to work more, because there is not even any sign of employment, meaning bringing new employees within the workplace, after many have been retrenched and many have died, many have gone for their retirements. So now there is that open space which also needs to be filled. Now, the same employees that are not given their increment, they are also overworked, they're burning, they can't take it anymore. But yet again, our labor laws, they not in favor of the employees. Instead, they continue to take away our voices as employees and continue to be on the side of the employer. It's what we also see in our CCMAs when we're dealing with cases. You will see that most of the cases, it's cases that are straightforward, but because of the CCMA is in the pocket of government, so they have to make by all means that we lose cases in CCMAs, but we are trying, comrades, we are trying so much. So those are the struggles that we are faced with. As I have mentioned, the issue of the minimum wage bill, where we are fighting against this 20 rand, we are still fighting till today. And we are clear and we know that what we need is a living wage of at least 12.5 per person, which is what we know that at least it's something that will be able to provide for a household, and they will be able to do everything that a human being needs to do, take their kids to school and everything else that they need to do. So those are the struggles, comrades, that I can mention at this moment, that I can even compare to the struggles that I've seen that are also happening also in the Palestine. Because if you look at how things happened even during the early 90s to them, where work was dominantly taken by people who were willing to take, even if the jobs are not paying what they're supposed to be paying, of which is what is currently happening now in South Africa. We are experiencing exactly that. And I believe, and I think that unions should stand up and fight also for those workers, because what most companies do now, they tend to take foreign employees so that they are able to victimize them and make them believe that they do not have any voice. They cannot say anything. They must just accept the peanuts that they are given in the workplaces. So I think it is our duty again, Comrade Sibei, to make sure that we visit all these plants. We make sure that we organize all these foreign employees. We make them understand that there are things that are called trade unions, who are voices of workers, so that they also don't become victims of these employers. Because the reason for these employers to take them is to make sure that they continue to decrease the money that they are paying to people. So lastly, comrades, I don't want to take much time. Lastly, out of all these struggles, it is clear that the struggle against women is still highly there, because all these, they just deepening gender inequalities. As we have seen, COVID-19 has just shown us now that in most workplaces, it is women who are there, single parents. We've seen during the lockdown that in most healthcare facilities, it was women, retail stores, women. So you can count so many workplaces, it's women. So this is also showing exactly that the struggle for women still needs to continue, and we need to fight, all of us, both genders, to fight against this inequality. So I think I will end there, comrade. I'm also minding time. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade Mzi. You raised some absolutely vital issues. The rolling back of the gains that have been made, a struggle in the past few decades, and also issues such as the xenophobia and the exploitation of migrants in our country, and the very little protection they have. And it's something for all of us to take up. And there are organizations, some of whom are in this discussion, who can perhaps speak to that as well. And of course, the whole question of the gender issues, women workers, and the particular work that needs to be done. Also, I think we need to take a leaf from struggles elsewhere, as you correctly point out. And just a few days ago, there was a very significant victory of the Amazon workers. I think it's a lesson for all of us not to give up, to continue mobilizing, or as one of the leading workers said, while Jeff Bezos was going into outer space, workers were mobilizing on the ground. So thanks very much, Mzi. There are a number of issues you raised that we can talk about later on. Some people who want to join are having some difficulty getting in. We're working on the problem. There have been over 100 people who registered. There are 50 participants at the moment, but we're trying our best. If we don't succeed, we have the recording, which we will pass on to them. I see somebody has raised his hand, Tony. We're going to go through all the speakers first, and then we're going to give people a chance. So I've made a note of your hand, so I will come back to you. But let's move on now to Manal. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Comrade Salim. I'd like to start by saluting the Clover workers on behalf of myself and on behalf of Palestinian workers on the ground who are inspired by them. And we definitely stand in solidarity with the Clover strikers, because we don't accept to see them encountering the same exploitative practices that Palestinian workers encounter every day, especially if the perpetrator is apartheid Israel. And standing in solidarity with the Clover workers is part of our fight against Israeli apartheid everywhere, not just in Palestine. which resonates with the vision of the new unions, because we believe that our struggle is not just a class struggle, but it is an anti-apartheid and an anti-colonial struggle. So just to give you a quick overview about the new unions. The new unions was created in 2010 after a victory achieved by more than 70 Palestinian workers who carried out an open-ended strike that lasted for 6 months, and that resulted in the collapse of the Israeli factory that they were working on. So so the new unions is the result of a victory achieved by Palestinian workers, and it is a grassroots and a voluntary workers organizations that focuses on unionizing workers who work for Israeli corporations. And before I delve deeper into what Palestinian workers encounter, I'd like to quickly highlight why Palestinians in the first place are forced to work for Israelis, for their colonizers. It's simply because Israel controls more than 60% of our land in the West Bank. I'm particularly talking about the West Bank because, you know, the Gaza Strip is blockaded, so Palestinians are not allowed to move out of it. And the situation of Palestinian citizens of Israel is different, and I'm not very much familiar with it because I cannot go there and be part of their struggle because of Israeli restrictions on the movement of people from the West Bank. So talking about the West Bank in particular, as I just said, Israel controls more than 60% of our land, mainly arable land, and more than 85% of our water resources. So this means that the agriculture sector, which historically used to be the main source of income for the majority of Palestinians, is no longer a source of livelihood. At the same time, Israel controls the movement of Palestinians and Kurds in the West Bank, inside the occupied territories and outside, and this has been harmful to the movement, as I said, of goods, and it has solidified the Palestinian market as a captive market to the Israeli one, and this is compounded with Israeli measures to facilitate Palestinian workers' access to the Israeli market under the banner of economic peace, through which Israel ensures or tries to ensure its security. And that's never in favor of Palestinian workers. It's very humiliating, it's very dehumanizing. And whenever the situation on the ground escalates, Palestinian workers are the ones to bear the brunt of Israeli escalation violence. And this is something that we witnessed a few days ago when Palestinian resistance increased, and in response to that, Israeli violence escalated. Palestinian workers were prevented from accessing their workplace, and they tried to smuggle through the holes of the wall, but they were shot at by Israeli soldiers. So they were really in dangerous situations, just trying to get access to their workplaces. And the new unions, at the same time, the new unions really struggles to organize workers to demand their rights. And if I want to trace back why the workers refuse to unionize despite of the dire working conditions that they encounter, it's because of the Israeli permit system, through which, Palestinian workers are granted permits to go and be legally working in Israel or for Israeli corporations. So Israel refuses to issue permits to all Palestinian workers, mainly claiming that they just issue permits to married Palestinians, but this is not usually the case, because many married Palestinians are not given permits, and the excuse that is usually given is because of security reasons, because Israel traces back the history of the workers and the history of their families and involvement in resistance, including nonviolent resistance. So for those who are lucky to get permits, they face another form of humiliation. This means that they are not privileged, or they are not treated better than those who don't have permits. Those who are granted Israeli permits wait for hours at Israeli checkpoints. Many of them have to get totally be naked in front of Israeli soldiers, which is very humiliating while they inspect them. And those who get a permit, they cannot, or they are always afraid to unionize and ask for more rights, or like their Israeli workers who work with them at the same workplace, because Israeli employers are in direct touch with the Israeli authorities that issue permits. So whenever Palestinian workers protest the bad working conditions, Israeli employers contact the Israeli authorities, so that the Israeli authorities make it difficult for Palestinian workers to get the permit or to renew their permit the next time. Regarding those who don't get permits at all, they just have one option, which is to smuggle. And this is really dangerous, because smuggling means to go to the workplace illegally, according to Israelis and to Israeli law. And sometimes they are shot by Israelis, and at the workplace, they cannot, it's near impossible for them to demand any rights, because Israeli employers can easily fire them without giving them any rights. And in Israeli law, they cannot ask for rights because they are illegal workers. So yeah, that's the problem that both workers who have permits and those who don't have permits face. I just want to be mindful of time. So as I'm wrapping up, I just want to pay your attention to something important, that although the unions works hard to unionize Palestinian workers for Israeli corporations, this doesn't mean that we want to preserve the status quo as it is. It is for us a temporary solution, as we are deprived of the right to access our land and natural resources. But what we really need, or what we really struggle for, is to dismantle Israeli apartheid and the illegal settlement enterprise, which are the root cause of what Palestinian workers encounter at the hands of Israeli employers. So this is why the new unions fully adopt the BDS call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Manal. That was a great presentation and lots of useful information. The Palestinian new unions have been working very closely, as you've heard from Sibey and John, with Kiwusa. And I think that relationship is developing and must be supported. And I think the kind of details you talked about are very important, and we can draw comparisons here as well with workers, casual workers, undocumented migrant workers, and so on. And we really need to continue doing that with comrades in other countries as well. And it just reminds me, actually, I mentioned the two events, and thank you very much, Leslie Powell, for giving us the details of the event tomorrow at NMU. But the third event, and I mentioned art as a form of resistance in KZN, Durban Block the Boat, and there is another event this Saturday at the Forge. It's organized by Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia and other groups. And it says no to xenophobia, no to racism, no to displacement, no to forced removals, an event in solidarity with all displaced people in the world from Johannesburg to Palestine. There'll be poetry, there'll be films, there'll be speakers, and the venue is the Forge, 87 Departed Street in Braamfontein. Thanks for letting me know, Firoza. So now we're coming to our last speaker, Lara Kiswani, but also please try and get your questions ready and use the chat if you prefer to do that as well. Please go ahead, Lara. Sarah.
Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be amongst you all. So again, my name is Lara Kiswani, and I'm with AROC, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. As Salim mentioned, we work to organize and serve poor and working class Arabs and Muslims, and we take on campaigns and issues that address all forms of structural oppression, but understand our liberation as tied to the liberation of all people. And we provide direct services, but we also work to overturn the systems that force our community to need those services in the first place. And for our communities, Arabs and Muslims in diaspora, Zionism, racism, militarism are at the root cause of that. And US imperialism is a primary contradiction. And it's for that reason that we led the international campaign to stop the largest apartheid Israel shipping line, SIN, from docking up ports across the world, block the boat. So this, in response to Israel's ongoing atrocities, the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions and a large coalition of major trade unions and professional associations called on trade unions and workers to boycott Israel and businesses that are complicit with its apartheid regime. They specifically urged for people to refuse to handle Israeli goods and supporting union members refusing to build Israeli weapons. This call for solidarity was a renewed call from 2014, the last time Israel indiscriminately bombed the Gaza Strip. So in 2014, AROC responded to this call by organizing a campaign to prevent Zim from unloading its cargo at one of the largest ports in North America, the Port of Oakland, California. And port workers of the International Longshore Warehouse Union, ILWU Local 10, honored our community pickets and did not unload that ship for 5 consecutive days, then for 3 consecutive months. And that Zim ship that used to dock at the Port of Oakland each week did not come back to the Port of Oakland until last June 2021. So 7 years later, learning that the apartheid profiteering ship was attempting to return to Oakland, California, we decided to renew the international call to block the boat. We organized ourselves, we prepared to mobilize community pickets at the Port of Oakland, and to call on our comrades at ILWU Local 10 to once again stand on the left side of history and honor those pickets. We also knew and know that ILWU Local 10 has consistently used their labor power in solidarity of social movements, from the movement against apartheid South Africa to supporting the movement for Black lives in the United States. And we wanted other workers across the world to support them in the sacrifice they were making at the Port of Oakland. So our call for international block the boat actions was supported by over 100 organizations, including many of you, our comrades in trade unions in South Africa, in Italy, in France, and across the United States. Actions to block the apartheid and war profiteering ships took place in Vancouver, in New York, New Jersey, in Houston, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, Seattle, Tacoma, Naples, and South Africa. And our First Nation community members, our Indigenous community members, ended up blocking the same ship we turned away from Oakland last year up in Canada. So the International Block the Boat campaign aimed to build on that history of the movement against apartheid South Africa and engage the international community in the movement to disrupt international commerce, global capitalism, and to boycott, divest, and sanction apartheid Israel. And we succeeded. So in June 2022, the Longshore Warehouse Union honored our 6 consecutive community pickets at the Port of Oakland. In a dramatic scene, we watched and celebrated as the apartheid profiteering Zim ship turned around and left the port once again. With this decisive victory, we can now successfully say that no Zim-operated ship has docked at the Port of Oakland since our organizing last June, and no Zim-operated ship has unloaded its cargo at the Port of Oakland, one of the largest ports in North America, in over 7 years and counting. This was a major success, not only for us in Oakland, but for workers worldwide. And the solidarity that was built across the world, this did not come without struggle, right? Of course, the Israeli consulate attempted to intervene. Zionist lawfare attempted to intimidate the workers. And at some port cities like Seattle, Washington, the only way another Zim ship was able to unload its cargo was with the force of police violence, breaking those community pickets. So we all know here that labor has the power and has consistently played an instrumental role in movements for social justice. Worker power and community solidarity can, in fact, interrupt international commerce, right? It can, in fact, interrupt global capitalism. It can rupture Zionist hegemony here in the United States and globally, and deepen the wedge between the corporate elite and all working people. It provides us with avenues not only to put pressure on our decision makers, but also to move the masses to a shared political vision where we can all live free of exploitation. And the success of Block the Boat, it wasn't just a message that we sent to the world that we will not do business with apartheid Israel. Workers will not cross the BDS picket. It wasn't only the power built across communities as they forge alliances with labor and demonstrate the ability to disrupt international commerce. It was not only the solidarity built across constructed borders, but it's also the potential. What it demonstrated is our potential to build power. So as my comrade Manal well articulated, we know that struggles of workers range from one context to another. As Comrade Mezi mentioned, we also know that the ongoing efforts are continuing to roll back the gains made by workers across the world. And as Comrade John mentioned, the weakness of our movements, whether community or labor movements, is a direct result of relentless attacks by the global elite, neoliberalism, racial capitalism, and authoritarianism and racism. And on the flip side of all of that, despite all we are up against, we also have the ability to unite, to forge alliances, to build and shift power in the face of the onslaught of these attacks. And I think Block the Boat offered us that lesson. As movements fighting for social justice today, it's really incumbent on us today to support struggles of our comrades in labor movements everywhere. We know the global working class you really face the brunt, right, of state violence and market-driven policies. And we know our vision, our collective vision for a healthier future, our solidarity with working people must surpass borders, must surpass prison walls, and has the potential to really force a redistribution of economic and political priorities from the local to the global. And here in the United States, we all know all too well that the US-Israeli partnership is very much a relationship of the global elite and the corporate class rooted in racial capitalism. We know that that's why the US is deeply invested in maintaining Israel as a proxy state in the global South. And in turn, Israel is deeply invested in maintaining its $3.8 billion of US support to continue its settler colonial expansion and regional dominance. The US is invested in Israel using Palestine as a laboratory for weapons, surveillance technology, and crowd control tactics. And Israel is invested in exporting that to the rest of the world. That's why police departments train with Israel. That's why the apartheid Israel has used the colonization of this land, the United States, as a playbook for what they're doing to our people in Palestine. And it's only through worker and community solidarity that we can actually disrupt these systems. And in particular, by disrupting apartheid Israel, impacting US imperialism. So we believe as a movement that the BDS movement helped turn the tide, right, around apartheid South Africa, and international solidarities and actions to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel will help bring about and support the movement on the ground in Palestine for a free Palestine. I think it's important for us today to ask the hard questions, as movements, how are we supporting and defending worker struggles like that of the Clover Strike, like that of Amazon workers who just formed their first union, as was mentioned, in Staten Island in the United States? How are we forging alliances, and how are we going to build on these victories, small and large, to demonstrate labor and community power and our ability to disrupt, but not only to disrupt, our ability to build. How can we use labor and community power to disrupt Israeli apartheid, including stopping Zim at ports everywhere? And simultaneously, how can we also build on our collective power and worker power? And I want to just end with, there's a quote from the President Trent Willis, who was the president of ILW Local 10 during our actions last year. And he said at the rallying march at the end of our demonstrations when the Zim ship turned away, workers' struggle is worldwide. When the workers of the world figure that out and realize that we have to band together to make change, then it'll be a better world, including for the Palestinian people. Worker power, economic power is real power, and it's more powerful than all those bombs that Israel is dropping. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Lara, as always. Thank you very much. I think these are also absolutely critical points. The role apartheid Israel plays in the global political economy, global capitalism, imperialism, their high-tech weaponry. We've seen through the Israeli company NSO, the surveillance that they use and lend to reactionary forces around the world. And now openly, brazenly, before it was on the quiet, but with despotic, undemocratic, authoritarian Arab rulers, particularly from the Gulf area, but also elsewhere. Those are critical points, and it's workers' power that can put a stop to it. I mean, for decades, Israel played this role for imperialism, siding with supporting reactionary regimes and putting down struggles first in the region, but also as far afield as Central America, South America, parts of Asia, and elsewhere. We know their role in South Africa in supporting the Bantustans and paying workers starvation wages, and that continues. There are a number of hands. I recognize Tony earlier, there's Sia, there's also someone's hand disappeared, Adams as well, and there are a few questions and comments on the chat. Perhaps Roshan, would you like to maybe read out some of the questions on the chat? If I see there's a question by Ibrahim. Ibrahim, do you want to put that question yourself? Can you come? Shall we?
Sure, I can. When it's my turn, you just tell me.
Okay, while you're there, please go ahead.
Okay, well, I just wanted to know from Manal.
We want to see you, if it's possible.
Let me see whether that's possible. Okay, I don't know. We'll see how it seems to be connecting. Anyway, thanks for the event, Salim and the others who have organized this. Really insightful. Yeah, I was particularly interested in Manal's presentation, and I just wanted to ask her if she could just say a few words about the particular experiences of women workers in Palestine.
Okay, great. Important question. Do you want to take that now, Manal?
Yeah, sure, I can. If
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really important question. So there are about 5,000 Palestinian women working for Israeli corporations compared to more than 130,000 Palestinian workers. So there is a huge difference in the number of women and men who work for Israelis, and mainly because as part of our traditions, men are the breadwinners, and also because the largest sector that Palestinians work in is the construction sector in Israel. So that's not the sector where women can work. They usually work in cleaning and in agriculture. And adding insult to the injury of women, that makes them or their situation more vulnerable than the situation of Palestinian men who work for Israelis, is that they are usually subject to sexual abuse, to the extent that some women are sometimes raped. That is something that people rarely talk about, even in Palestine, because the women themselves are very secretive about it, those who encounter these different forms of sexual abuse, because of the traditions in Palestine, because they sometimes they risk losing their jobs while it's their only source of income, when they are pressured by their families, when they find out about what these women encounter. And I mentioned that it's hard to organize workers to demand their rights, but it's not impossible. I mean, the new unions, it just slows down the process. I mean, the fact that the workers are intimidated to unionize, especially women. So what we do is we provide both women and men with trainings to raise awareness about their rights, how they can demand their rights. And we also, talk a lot with them about our successful experiences in unionizing, especially when, as I said, the Israeli factory collapsed after a 6 month of strike held by Palestinian workers. And in January 2021, other workers in the factory of Yamit also carried out a strike for 20 days, and they were successful, especially as a result of international solidarity with them. And we also focus on telling workers about how important international solidarity and how much international solidarity we have, so that they become more encouraged to unionize. Talking about women in particular, to make women encouraged to share their stories, we mainly prefer to have like women who volunteer with the new unions to go and talk with them. That makes it easier for the women workers to talk about their experiences, especially experiences of sexual abuse. Then we start working with them and raise awareness about their rights based on what they share with us. Yeah, I hope that I answered your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Manal.
Ibrahim agrees. Thanks very much, Manal. Tony, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. I've been asked to read out a message from Manchester Palestine Action in England. First of all, congratulations to the comrades with the block the boat. Great victory. And the message is this. In Manchester, we always had a massive history of solidarity with South Africa, inspired by your struggle. And of course, we're with you workers at Clover and elsewhere. And we are united in our support for Palestinians under another apartheid. We will do whatever you recommend to us and support you all the way. And we've already started with that support, and that support will continue when I go back to Manchester. Just a word about the massive weapons industry that Israel has. What our activists have done in England is we've already closed one of their weapons plants in Oldham, England. We've closed the factory, and we are after the other 10 others. Our activists are occupying these, destroying the machinery that makes the drones that kill Palestinians, and our activists are also walking out of court because they are unable to actually convict us. This is the struggle that will continue. We will be with you. We've raised some money already. We'll be raising some money further. Thank you very much, and it's an honor for me to actually be part of this. Thank you.
And it's an absolute honor to have you, Comrade Tony. The struggle against Albert in the UK, in Manchester, and elsewhere has been absolutely inspiring for all of us. Thanks very much for that message. Comrade Sia.
Thanks, Comrade Salim. And yeah, I want to say, firstly, congratulations to the PSC for pulling this together. I think this is quite very important. Okay. I think so. I think this is very important, and so, and from that, and I think the Block the Boat campaign, and I saw Comrade Zuir here, the Clover Strike, have been important starting points in showing us that solidarity in action is very possible internationally, to unite the workers and their struggle. We know we always talk about internationalism, and the question for me is, how do we grab and how do we make use of this moment? Because I think this is a very important moment. How do we not lose this moment? And how do we build from it? Because I think this is very important. And you know, after 1993, in what happened in Oslo, we also saw how migrant workers came into Israel for jobs that were occupied by Palestinian people, and how migrants, especially migrants in construction and agriculture, are being exploited. We're seeing that in South Africa, and how the blame is also shifted. I mean, we see the rise of, and these are similarities, great similarities. How do we grab these moments and build on them for an international working class movement, whether on the workplace or in communities? So how do we make use of this very important moment?
Thanks, Comrade Sia. Important point. And we're going to ask the presenters to round up later briefly, so perhaps they can respond to what you've said. We also had Comrade Abida, if I'm not mistaken. Abida, please go ahead. Abida?
No, I see. Comrade, I think you must be mistaken. I didn't raise my hand.
Oh,
Sorry.
Amanda. I'm sorry.
Amanda Adams.
Amanda Adams, please go ahead. Apologies. Amanda, are you with us? Okay. Roshan, you wanted to say something as well.
Well, I was just going to say a kind of thank you to people. So maybe the speakers could, if there are no more questions or comments, I didn't see any in the chat. I want to just say a few final words. Amanda Adams has written in the chat. Thank you, Amanda. Maybe the speakers could just say a few words, and then we can, then I'll come in afterwards.
Sure. Shall we go the opposite order? Shall we start with Lara? Please, if there's anything you would like to say or round up things you were not able to say, please go ahead.
Thank you. And I just want to also offer my congrats and solidarity with the work happening with the Clover Strike, as well as all of you who have been engaged terrains. And I think I want to end by answering Sia's question, which is, from our vantage point here in the United States, I think for us, a challenge is to build a left, a united left that has a clear political program that understands our struggles against capitalism, militarism, and racism as one, and also understands ourselves as not just a movement limited to the constructed borders of the United States. Something that we must do and overcome here in the US is our weakness around internationalism and making sure that anti-imperialism, but also international solidarity is integrated in all our work. And that work is happening as we speak. So there's a movement of people in those conversations grappling with these tough questions and hopefully being able to build out a political program that would lend itself towards giving tangible solidarity to all of you in South Africa and around the world who are fighting on the front lines. And I'll just end by saying that there's still a lot of hope and potential, and that what we have to do as movement, so I'm a community organizer, I'm not a worker, and from my positionality, I would say we must do better in supporting the struggles of workers everywhere, including right here in the United States, and being able to forge those alliances so that we can build on this moment. We have an opening right now, especially as it relates to solidarity with Palestine. And as a Palestinian, I understand that opening is not only offering something for Palestinians, but we know a free Palestine would lend itself to the liberation of struggles of people across the world. And so we hope that we can all seize this moment to be able to forge those alliances and build a real political program that understands the intersections of capitalism, racism, and militarism.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. That's great, Lara. Manal, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, so sorry, answering the question or saying some last words? I'm confused.
Both, if you prefer.
Okay, I agree with what Lara said, so I really don't have anything to add. I just wanted to emphasize that, yeah, we should continue globalizing our struggle and exchanging experiences of resistance to the different exploitative practices that workers everywhere encounter. And how they resist that, because that really matters. And it's important also to unite against Israeli apartheid, to isolate Israel and to hold it accountable, mainly by supporting the BDS movement, because it's important to always remember that dismantling apartheid Israel is about making the paradigm of justice thrive and triumph, not just in Palestine, but everywhere. Thank you so much for joining this interesting webinar.
Thanks, Manal, and keep inspiring and keep doing what you do. Mzi, please go ahead.
Okay, so what I will say on my side is that let's continue building up these working together spaces and exchanging our experiences, and also very much important that we make sure that each and every time we join and build together worker struggles together with community struggles, we don't separate the two. We always make sure that they're moving together. And also it is important that we go down to the ground and organize all unorganized workers, especially in the industrial sector. We need to go and be physically there and assist, especially our migrant workers who are being exploited in those workplaces. So that's all that I will say, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mzi. As always, Mzi is always with us on the front lines in solidarity action in that area. Thank you very much. Comrade Sibey, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Comrade Salim. I think for us, And I'll say, you know, both on behalf of JUSA, but also our civic here at Dravasham, so Songe Civic, we are saying that, you know, the betrayals of the ANC, the betrayals of the leaders in the Arab world of the struggle of the Palestine itself demonstrate that the question of the struggle to build, you know, a Palestinian solidarity movement is in reality the struggle to forge a working class solidarity and internationalism. Because, you know, to expect that the ruling elite responsible for oppressions and exploitation of their own people will stand in consistent and principled solidarity with the oppressed people of Palestine is not realistic, is illusion, and I think a dangerous one in a situation where in Palestine we're confronted, I must say, with something much more brutal than apartheid. And I mean, you know, I've raised this in number of issues, in number of, you know, occasions, and I know that, you know, for comrades, saying that apartheid is a shorthand, really, and given how the struggle against apartheid was popular. But what we're faced with in Palestine is much more cruel and brutal than that, because, you know, the fundamental difference between what we have there and what we had here is that apartheid always relied and considered the mainstay of capital accumulation as a cheap black migrant labor. What you are having in Palestine is a systematic ethnic cleansing that seeks to displace and, of course, evict indigenous Palestinians from their land. Areas that have now become Israel, but it's very clear that if they have their way, they will evict them from the whole of historical Palestine. And for that reason, comrades, the struggle for Palestine, the struggle for solidarity, and making sure that we check, firstly, the aggression of Israeli imperialism, but also supporting the struggles of, you know, Palestinian workers in building their organization, in building their movement, in building their resistance, and to fight for free, independent, and for us, the socialist Palestine, because the oppression of Palestine is, of course, the question of global capitalism that we see manifesting itself in a form of imperialism everywhere. And therefore, the oppression of Palestine is oppression, you know, of all of us that are slaves under global capitalism, a system of capital accumulation based on enslavement of overwhelming majority of the working class people across the planet. And therefore, we are saying that let's stand together. And I think Clover Strike has demonstrated that we can mobilize a reliable solidarity based on ordinary, oppressed and exploited masses of the working class people. And if we build on the, you know, successes of Clover Strike, we can be able to make sure that SAFTU, COSATU, and all sections of an organized labor movement, but also civic movements beyond our small civic here, but, you know, big civics in the country and many communities take up the struggle for Palestine. And that is how we're going to force the ANC government to actually begin to take a firm position on the issue of Israel, not because they want, but because we don't give them a choice. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Comrade Sibay. And I think that important difference between apartheid South Africa and occupied Palestine is vital. Some call it, like Ilan Pape, an incremental genocide, actually. The ethnic cleansing has not stopped and the Nakba continues. In fact, some members of the Israeli ruling class are talking about a final solution as well. It's shocking. I see Amanda's hand is up. Perhaps Amanda, please go ahead. Unmute.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Prof. Valley. Thank you, everybody, for this very important seminar. I do believe that BDS is essential in today's age, and really it is about justice for the poor. We are at the moment, by the way, in this unmissable time, very involved with Black liberation theology, which does liberate the oppressed from any form of oppression. And Palestinian oppression is really the hallmark of oppression of Zionism throughout the world, where we see injustice done to people who are not always able to defend themselves. So thank you very much for all the good work and all the support and solidarity with Palestinian people.
Thanks very much, Amanda, and thanks for joining us. And we will work together going forward on a number of projects. You know, a very important point that was raised by today is the links between workers' struggle and community struggles. I think Lara made those points as well. I mean, Sibey is, I think, is with Aisha and Lou in the Robert Shem Tenants Association. And I think that is absolutely vital, and we need to strengthen those links as well. The final speaker before Naeem Gina closes is John. John, please go ahead.
Thank you, Comrade Salim. I just want to comment on the Comrade Sia's question. I think within the ranks of Clover and in Kiwusa, there is a large number of workers and substitutes who are now committed to contribute to the struggle of the Palestinian people. And I think we need to build on that development in this way. The BDS has identified Israeli companies that are operating, that are having investments and businesses in South Africa. I think together we must sit down and find a way of identifying whether those companies have unionized workers. If they do have unionized workers, we need to then approach those unions to discuss how we can then raise awareness amongst their members and workers in general about the nature of the investment and the nature of the employer that they are working with, and bring out the link with Palestine. If these workers are not unionized, together with BDS and other Palestinian solidarity movements, we must then find a way of actually connecting up with workers in those particular workplaces. And then through that process, we can then work towards convening a meeting of unions, of organizations, substitutes, workers, activists who are directly involved in those particular companies and corporations. Work towards a big meeting where we can then discuss how we're going to draw them in to this campaign against Israel. And I think in that way we can then broaden the kind of lessons and the kind of examples that we started to develop with the Clover Strike. And I think in that way we can also assist in the kind of rebuilding of the workers' movement via the issue of Palestine and struggles. And I think for me, that could be a useful way of actually taking forward some of the issues that have developed through the Clover Strike. Thank you, Comrade Salim.
Absolutely, John, not just useful, but vital, necessary, and we need to build on that. Thanks so much. Naeem and Roshan will close. Naeem, please go ahead.
Let me switch my camera on. Okay. Thank you, Comrade Salim. And my job is simple, just to say a few words, but first to thank all of the people that that ensured that this was a really great webinar that took place. The speakers, comrades Manal, Mzi, Lara, John, Sabay, all of the others who commented and spoke, and the organizations that helped to make sure that this came together. Palestine Solidarity Campaign and SABDS Coalition, Block the Boat, etc. So thanks. I think the comments that were made by other speakers as well reflected how important this engagement was. I think what's really important that comes out of this engagement and in some ways the past year, that for many of us solidarity activists, certainly in South Africa, has been a lesson, is that when we say that solidarity is in all directions, is both ways, we might say, it's a truth, it's a reality. We saw last year in May the worker solidarity with the Palestinians during the war on Jerusalem and Gaza, and then a few months later, in the middle of last year, when South Africa went through a particularly difficult period with the almost insurrectionary environment that we faced, and something that challenged us not just physically, but in all kinds of ways, we saw expressions of support coming for South Africa and for South Africans from Palestinian comrades. And I think that for a people who believes that we have won our liberation, to receive words of solidarity from people who are still living under apartheid, occupation, colonialism, is an extremely powerful and strong thing. And then we saw it again now with the Clover Strike and the Clover struggle, with Palestinians saying that we support you, we are in solidarity with you. And so solidarity wasn't just one way, but both ways. And I think that this really highlights the kind of comments that we know from people like Comrade Samora Machel and others about the meaning of solidarity, that our struggles are one struggle, that solidarity is an act of love, that solidarity is, as the one ETA comrade said, a tenderness among peoples. It is not about giving and receiving, but it's about waging joint struggles together. So I think that this was very important. And finally, Salim, if you allow me just to say that comrades might remember in the run-up to the ANC conference in 2017, the Zionist lobby in South Africa made a big noise about how if the South African embassy in Tel Aviv were downgraded, how South Africa would suffer economically, etc. Apart from the fact that didn't happen, our position has always been, of course, that we don't want support from countries or from states and companies that oppress other people. That if we are going to lose any investments from Israel in this instance, we are quite happy to do so. But the reality is that in the South African case, until Clover, and to respond in a sense to what Comrade John said earlier, all of the Israeli investments in South Africa use mostly Israeli labor. They do not use South African labor, except in some cases, a few dozen South African workers, mostly Israeli labor. And the saddest thing about this is that a lot of this is in South African state-owned enterprises. And I think that is a battle that we still need to fight. So let me end by thanking comrades for making these linkages and showing the importance of solidarity moving in all directions among oppressed people, and hoping that we will reinforce and build on this for a much stronger global struggle in the future. Thank you, Salim.
Thanks, Naeem. Roshan.
I think there's nothing left to say other than to thank everybody again, the speakers, all of whom I think made the point that it's an internationalism is what we're talking about when we talk about international solidarity. It's workers, communities across the world coming together to fight the same struggle and to support each other. And I just want to, as we leave, just play a very short clip of the Clover workers who, along with the SABDS coalition, most recently, this is one of many of the pickets and protests, protested outside an investment conference held in the most expensive part of Johannesburg, Sandton, at which our president was speaking, and in fact caused the media to actually ask and put our president on the spot about the Clover Strike. So just to get a sense for people of the spirit of the Clover Strikers, who, as has been said, are now in the 5th month of the strike, which really is a tough struggle, and to say how much we appreciate, I think, in South Africa, in Africa as a continent and in the global South, the opportunity to express solidarity with Palestinian workers, and equally the appreciation we have, as Manal has said, for their solidarity to us. So I think that's all that needs to be said more, and we look forward to continuing the struggle and to connecting again with comrades who've taken the time to be with us, and hopefully we can strengthen the worker and community struggles around the world.
Fantastic, and thanks very much, Rosh. And thank you, everyone, and particularly the speakers. Just great inputs, and stay well, and aluta continua, aluta. And the last word must go to Buyisile, who mentions a few things in the chat. Absolutely inspiring, and take care, comrades. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, comrades.
Bye.
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 Comrades.
Perhaps those who can put their videos on, please do so. Thanks, Cheryl.
Bye, comrades.
Bye.
The last pictures were our Block the Boat, where the Union Federations, COSATU and SAFTU together protested against Zimlines.